Hi and welcome everybody. My name is Philip Tanser, better known as Logan McCree, and you are watching The Uncanny X-Men. About half a year ago, I was contacted by a reporter from the BBC, and he asked me if he could interview me and join me on my journey to Chicago to the International Conference on Men's Issues. And I agreed to that, and he followed me for about a week. First, he spent time with me here in Scotland, and then we went to Chicago together. A couple of months ago, a radio version of this documentary has already been released on the BBC with the title Into the Manosphere. For the most part, it was okay. There were a couple of things that I thought were not really accurate, but overall it was okay. I didn't like the title because it was really I'm just a men's rights activist, and the whole documentary really didn't go deeper into other aspects of the manosphere apart from men's rights. So I didn't like the title. The BBC has released a statement about the documentary that is about to come out on their BBC iPlayer, I think. So it's just an online version, and I'm gonna read it out to you, and then afterwards I'm gonna go into certain aspects of what they wrote about the documentary, and will give you my thoughts. So now it starts. I think as a man's rights activist, you are constantly being silenced. That was a statement that I made, and that's how they started it. Philip Tanser is a former gay porn actor who now works as a hairdresser, artist, and gallery owner in the Scottish Highlands. He has been involved in the men's rights movement for over 2 years, first attending the International Conference on Men's Issues in London in 2018. It's a summit where men and women who believe men are at the disadvantage in modern society convene to share their thoughts and common ground. Intrigued by the concept and the issues surrounding it, BBC journalist Alvaro Alvarez traveled with Philip to the same conference, this time in Chicago, in August of last year, in an attempt to get under the skin of this movement and ultimately Philip's investment and fascination with it. For Alvaro, confronted with a confusing setting where amongst other things, domestic violence towards women is being downplayed by university professors. Conversely, Philip is openly captivated, yet it soon emerges there is more to his own backstory than meets the eye. As part of his journey, Philip also meets with Graham Golden, a retired police officer and chief investigator with over 30 years' experience who now works as a violence prevention trainer. Having had numerous heated exchanges on social media, Philip and Graham agreed to meet in person to talk through their alternate stances when it comes to men's rights and their role in society. We also hear from Tracy Farrell, a research associate with the Knowledge Media Institute, part of the Open University, who through her work has been delving into what has become known as the Manosphere, a platform evolving within society where it is becoming easier to have a misogynistic opinion and vocalize it. It goes against most logical thinking, but are we really starting to flip the narrative so that women hold the power and men are subjugated by it? Are we as a society designed to ignore man's vulnerability? Has feminism gone too far? So that was the whole statement, and now I'm gonna go into certain aspects of it. The first part, when they say Philip Tanser is a former gay porn actor who now works as a hairdresser, artist, and gallery owner in the Scottish Highlands. Obviously, the fact that I used to be a porn actor, gay porn actor, really doesn't mean anything in regards to men's rights, but it's obviously a good it's a good headline. It makes people potentially more interested and makes me look a little bit more like a freak. But I do not hold it against the BBC at all. I think every good advertiser would do the same thing and try to make it sound as interesting as possible. Then when it says he has been involved in the men's rights movement for over 2 years, first attending the International Conference on Men's Issues in London in 2018. It's a summit where men and women who believe men are at a disadvantage in modern society convene to share their thoughts and a common ground. I think that is absolutely fair and well written. The fact that they include men and women, I think, is well done, and I don't see a bias in what's written here. So the next one. Intrigued by the concept and the issues surrounding it, BBC journalist Alvaro traveled with Philip to the same conference, this time in Chicago in August of last year, in an attempt to get under the skin of this movement and ultimately investment and Philip's investment and fascination with it. Again, no problem with that. For Alvaro, confronted with confusing setting where, amongst other things, domestic violence towards women is being downplayed by university professors. That I have a huge problem with, because it was a very long conference, and I have to ask Alvaro which professor it was that, in his opinion, downplayed domestic violence, and I find it quite funny because domestic violence against men is constantly and relentlessly being downplayed, most of all by feminist organizations, but by society as well, by the whole of society, really. So I do have a problem with that, because it portrays the conference as anti-female and as if we don't care about female victims of domestic violence. And I think you can ask all men's rights activists that female victims of domestic violence absolutely do need support. It's just that male victims need support as well. So I'm not very happy with that sentence at all. Conversely, Philip is openly captivated, yet it soon emerges there is more to his own backstory than meets the eye. I assume that they're referring to the fact that my mother was shot by her second husband when I was 16 years old. That is something that I talked about with Alvaro for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and I made very clear that it has absolutely nothing to do with my involvement in the men's rights movement. And if it would have moved me in any direction, you could say that it would have moved me towards feminism, as in, oh, my mother was a victim, so I should focus on female victims of domestic violence or something. But I have always been an egalitarian, and I always see both sides, and I think that female victims of domestic violence get a lot of attention, as they rightfully should, but male victims of domestic violence don't get any attention. So I think they're gonna take focus a little bit on this part of my backstory, and I don't know why. It's absolutely fine to mention it, but it doesn't affect my involvement in the men's rights movement. For Alvar, as part of his journey, Philip also meets with Graham Golden, a retired police officer and chief investigator with over 30 years' experience, who now works as a violence prevention trainer. Having had numerous heated exchanges on social media, Philip and Graham agree to meet in person to talk through their alternate stances when it comes to men's rights and their role in society. Well, Graham and I, we actually we work on the same thing. It's just Graham is quite feminist indoctrinated and has a very strong focus on male accountability and male guilt, and I have no problem with male accountability. I think we are accountable for almost everything that happens in our lives, and a lot of men's rights activists agree with that. That's why we have so many trainings how to avoid abusive partners and how to get better in your own life. the problem with Graham's approach is that he never talks about female agency and also female violence. So that's where we have real issues. There are things where we see eye to eye, but there are quite a few things where we don't see eye to eye, primarily when it comes to approaches. It's interesting. Well, it's funny that they put into this section here retired police officer and chief investigator with over 30 years' experience, obviously showing that he knows what he's talking about, and I would say in parts he knows what he's talking about, but that doesn't keep him from being indoctrinated. We also hear from Tracy Farrell, a research associate with the Knowledge Media Institute, part of the Open University, who through her work has been delving into what has become known as the Manosphere, a platform evolving within society where it is becoming easier to have a misogynistic opinion and vocalize it. She was already featured in the radio segment, and I actually didn't have a lot of problem with what she said, but her focus was on other parts of the manosphere. She focused, as far as I remember, on incels and the more radical parts of MGTOW and certain black-pilled parts of the manosphere. Unfortunately, we did not talk to each other, and there was no connection between Tracy and me at all. I would have really liked to talk to her, and I find it almost unfair towards her that she was featured in a documentary with very little connection to the original topic of the documentary, and it would have been interesting to talk to her. Again, the way I remember it, most of what she said made sense. Of course, there are misogynistic parts in the manosphere. I think nobody would deny that, just like man hating is. I would say that man hating is way more prevalent within the feminist community, and misogyny is being called out in parts of the manosphere where man hating is not really called out in feminism, from my point of view. And I mentioned to Alvaro a couple of times that it would have been so much better if she would have been part of the conversation instead of just adding her to the documentary, and I hope it's better edited or it's better connected in this video version of the documentary than in the radio version. Now, the last vid. It goes against most logical thinking, but are we really starting to flip the narrative so that women hold the power and men are subjugated by it? First, the fact saying it goes against most logical thinking. Thank you very much for not saying all logical thinking. That leaves the door at least a little bit open. But by phrasing it goes against most logical thinking, you would assume that men's rights activists don't think logically, when all we do is rely on statistics and argue logically. I would say that it's feminists that don't argue logically for the most part. There are exceptions, obviously. Looking at you, Christina Hoff Sommers. Yeah, and when they say, but are we really starting to flip the narrative so that women hold the power and men are subjugated by it? The way it's phrased is tricky, because most positions of power in the world are being held by men, but do these men work in favor of men's issues, or do these men work in favor of women's issues? Men and women hold very different powers in society. Men do hold more positions of power, but women hold much more social power, and women are the majority of voters, and very important voters. So both men and women hold power, but I would say that when it comes to social issues and man's issues, female issues, women do hold more power. The way it's phrased here, it sounds as if women took over everything and are leading all countries, and it's that's not what it looks like, obviously. So I don't hate the way it's phrased, but I really don't like it either. The way it's phrased makes you tend to say no. Society is not has not changed like that. Now the last sentence. Are we as a society designed to ignore man's vulnerability? Has feminism gone too far? I think that is actually a really, really strong sentence to end the description with, because it really opens a door. It's two questions that are not really leading you somewhere. I would actually say that they are leading you more into the direction of being open to man's issues. Are we as a society designed to ignore man's vulnerability? I would say a lot of people, most people would say, yes, we are. Um, Even some feminists might say, yeah, we don't care as much about man's vulnerability. And the last sentence, has feminism gone too far? Again, most people would agree with this statement, apart from some feminists, of most feminists. So these two last questions actually open the conversation and make people a bit more sympathetic towards men's rights issues. Overall, I think I get a feeling what the documentary will look like, quite similar to the radio version, where I think I will be portrayed positively and with quite a lot of sympathy. I think the men's rights movement will be portrayed as a potentially dark underground movement with ties to misogyny and white supremacy and all that nonsense. Mm, because that's the mainstream narrative, and Alvaro does have he works for the BBC, and the BBC has a certain opinion, and they are, I would say, quite pro feminism. And Alvaro, he's a very nice guy, and he tried to be as open to me as a person as he could, and I think he did a very good job. I would call him a friend. Um, but he's not red pilled, so he does view the men's rights movement through a blue pilled lens, and I don't think he will be able to say they are working for something positive. He would always choose the feminist point of view to all the problems that men face. So, because the problems are so obvious, even feminism can't look away anymore, and they have to say, oh yeah, men's suicide rates and all of that. But obviously, the feminists' solution to that is that men have to become more in touch with their feelings and more feminine and stuff like that. Where I agree that men have to get in touch with their feelings, but that is not more feminine. That just means becoming more emotionally competent, and that can happen in a masculine way, because female expression and male expression is slightly different. Obviously, these are generalizations. Yeah, so I think it will be a fair documentary when it comes to me. I think it will be as fair as you can expect it from the BBC, which means it will still have a bias. Um, let's hope for the best. I really hope that it will highlight some man's issues. That's the only thing I care about. I wish they would rather demonize me but highlight man's issues, so that people start to listen, and so that we can actually tackle male victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and rape, and homelessness, suicide rates, the struggling of masculinity. It was quite interesting, and this how I want to end this video. I last saw Alvaro a couple of weeks ago for a photo shooting for the avatar photo of the documentary. And in this conversation, we talked about masculinity, and he thought, and I don't want to misquote him, but he thought that I, as a men's rights activist, don't see him as a positive example for masculinity or as a man, and I had to completely disagree. I think he's a good example of masculinity, and I think he would be a great father, and I'm sure he's a very good partner. I think that he would benefit from being a little bit more red-pilled. But we all need time to get to places, and maybe it's just not his journey. But I found it interesting that he thought I had a very different opinion on him than I actually did. And I think some people within the manosphere would call him certain names like crybaby or beta male, but not because that's who he is, only because of what he represents. So only because he represents the BBC, and because he is still blue. He is blue-pilled, but as a person, he's just a normal guy. He's just a normal man, and I respect him as much as all of you guys. We are all at different stages. So yeah, and he when the radio version came out, he was quite worried what I would think about it, and that I would be angry at it. And I actually quite liked it. I thought it wasn't well structured, but I didn't mind the way I was portrayed. And so he's very aware that this documentary will be watched by us in a very critical way. He's very aware of that. And so when it comes out, try to judge it be nice, because he works for the BBC. He is who he is, and we can't expect the whole world to share our worldview. What we can hope for is to be treated as fairly as possible. I hope that's going to be the outcome. Sorry that this video was quite long. I hope it was informative. The documentary is gonna come out on April the 21st. And it's 24 minutes long. I'm gonna try to leave a link below if I figure out how to do that. All the best, and see you soon.